It's hard. It's hard to devote yourself to a cause that is so urgent and not be able to get the traction needed to make the change that is absolutely necessary. It's hard to read the headlines, floods, fires, famines, plagues, and tell your children that everything is all right. It's not all right. Cry out for justice. Justice for Mother Nature. We can protect our wildlife, our air, water, food, and climate.
Buongiorno. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by saying that this is a quite emotional moment, personally, because it has taken us 5 years from when we started this journey with the last international conference in Milan. And I was quite amazed that all the international speakers' friends had confirmed the participation for today. So thank you very, very much. It's very much appreciated. I think we've come a long way. So let's start with the first panel that touches on the Blue Economy Path and One Ocean Foundation. Who is One Ocean Foundation? We are a non-profit foundation based in Milan, and we focus our efforts on accelerating solutions to open issues by inspiring leaders and promoting blue economy with a special focus on ocean literacy. We work as a platform. We try to get together citizens, reach out to institutions, companies on that main mission to drive forward the goals on the SDG 14. Our activities are based on basically 3 pillars. We work a lot with companies and try to drive this change through the companies. We'll get more into this later on. We work on environmental projects, and we have a strong base on science, thanks to the advice that we receive from our International Scientific Committee. And we also focus on educational projects, working with schools, universities. Our funding comes mainly from companies that believe in our mission, and we also have a 13% project-driven funds. These are some numbers of our activities over the past 5 years. We have worked on plus 300 projects. We have managed to remove or help to remove about 110 tons of plastic trash from coastal waters. This is mainly in third world countries. We've been publishing 11 scientific papers submitted. Not all of them are published yet, but we're waiting for them to be published. We have some in the pipelines. And I think we can skip that slide because we have heard a lot on the numbers, on the importance on the ocean. So I'm not going to go too much into depth on that. But we really feel that there's a particular momentum for the ocean right now. Especially in 2023, we had the great news after 20 years of negotiations that finally the UN High Seas Treaty has been signed off, and now it's the responsibility of the different nations to implement the treaty. So we hope this is not going to take another 20 years, but this will happen much faster. Again, on the UN side, there was the COP in December in Montreal, where we finally had the global diversity framework. And the EU is really pushing forward as one of the main drivers as continent with the Green Deal, and also with the EU taxonomy that has been published, and the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive. So there is really momentum going forward on the ocean, and a lot of activities globally, but also especially on the EU, So we really have to use this momentum and drive these changes forward, being in the decade of the ocean, 2020, 2030 by the United Nations. And we don't have time to lose. So we really, as I said before, focus on companies. We think that the real change should come from the companies, from the entrepreneurial side. We don't have to wait to change for any laws or regulations coming from above, but from an entrepreneurial perspective, either because you just feel it's right, you realize it. One of our studies that we'll present later on, Business for Ocean Sustainability, goes exactly that direction, because it's about awareness. We have to be aware of our impact. There's direct impacts, indirect impacts, and all the industry has an impact. 80% of our issues from the ocean, on the ocean, comes from land-based activities. So that's why our main focus as foundation is really on business. Before we go too much into depth, I think it's important that we define our definition of blue economy, because there's a lot of the definitions out there on blue economy. Our definition is quite different, because it has a much broader perspective to it. Blue economy is more defined many times as ocean economy, versus our definition of blue economy, and that's the findings of the report that we'll present later on with my colleagues from the panel, is really that almost all the industries have an impact on the ocean environment, either directly or indirectly, and this makes a huge difference. So please bear in mind, whenever you hear about blue economy from our definitions, that's what we refer to. With this, I have the big pleasure to ask the colleagues and friends that have been working on over the past 4 years on these studies to join me here on stage so we can officially start with our panel. And I please ask to come here Stefano Pogutz, full-time MBA director, Bocconi School of Management, president of One Ocean's Scientific Committee, Federico Fumagalli, partner of McKinsey, Giulio Magni, operations director, One Ocean Foundation, and Sue Armstrong-Brown, global director of environmental impact and thought leadership from CDP. Thank you very much, Sue. Okay. Now, we're treating a topic that sounds a bit tough, but we'd like to make it as interesting as possible. And so we set it up as a dialogue and as an open dialogue, although every one of us has presentations prepared. I think I left the slide pointer somewhere. Here it is. Sorry. So let me start with Giulio. If you can start to explain what we mean with the blue economy path, where we come from, and the words to you. Thanks, Giulio.
Thank you, Jan. So we started in 2019 with a pioneer studies with a new approach on this relevant topic. Here we go. And we decided to have a qualitative and quantitative approach on this topic, focusing on the awareness, but at the same time on response of companies regarding the awareness and activities and innovations implemented by companies. Over the last years, we decided to cover all industries, and in 2019 we started with a focus on Mediterranean Sea, covering 220 companies, divided in 13 industry sectors. And then the year after, we decided to move forward with a larger sample of companies, reaching 1,660 companies in 17 industrial sectors. And then, as we will see in a few minutes, this year we decided to move forward again, capturing the blue opportunity with this new report that it's even larger with much more companies analyzed. So we started understand what kind of pressures 17 industries generate on the ocean. Thanks to an independent scientific review we have conducted, thanks to 56 scientific researchers based internationally, coming from natural and social sciences, and we asked them what's the level of the pressures generated by these 17 industries on the ocean. Considering these good environmental status descriptors, they are 11 descriptors defined by European Union that wanted to define to help each country in order to have a point of reference in terms of ocean sustainability. And we use also a more broader approach, considering not only the direct pressures generated by companies, so all activities that directly interact with marine ecosystems, but also considering the indirect pressures that sometimes or mostly are more relevant compared to the direct ones. And we figure out that more than the 80% of the pressures are generated by mainland activities. In this heat map, we can see in the left column the 17 industries, and in the top row we have the GES, as I said before, divided in 3 domains, and the colors help to understand the level of pressures that different companies, different industries generate on the ocean. The red ones are the most relevant, the most important. The yellow one are the lower important, and then we have the gray boxes as well that show that we don't have any pressure at all. But we can see that in theory, all the industries can generate some kind of pressures on the ocean ecosystem. As we can see, we have in particular 3 domains that are touched. The first one is contamination, the second is biodiversity, and the third one is marine litter. So here we can see also that it's quite important to consider the indirect pressures as well. So in our studies, we try to understand the level of commitments of our samples, considering the SDG 14, the SDG dedicated to the ocean life below water. And thanks to our studies, we try to understand how many companies disclosed this SDG on their sustainability reports. And we figure out that just the 7%, this is 3 years ago, said something in their reports on these SDGs. And at the same time, we try to understand the level of commitment, the level of awareness, but also how these companies have been implementing any kind of activities, thanks to a natural language tool that help us to identify keywords that we thought were linked to commitments, objectives, and activities disclosed in these reports. And we figure out that around 26% of these samples are in some way at the same time aware and activate on this topic. But obviously it's not enough, and we will see in a few minutes how this data evolved over the last years. So we really understood that we need to fill this gap. We need to unlock the awareness and the activation of best practices, innovations, and technologies throughout these companies. And we try to launch this initiative. It's called Ocean Disclosure Initiative. This 2 years ago, so it's been 3 years. We have working on this tool that wants to support at the same time companies and financial institutions in order to promote guidelines, helping them to have a strategic approach on this topic and implementing best practice and activities to face this huge problem.
Okay.
My last slide is dedicated to our latest report, as I said before, that this year took into consideration a really big amount of companies, 2,400 and more companies. We have considered the 100 companies for each of 20 market stock index worldwide. So we had as a sample the 70% of the global market capital represented in our research. So I don't want to say more on this research.
Thanks very much.
I call upon Jan for going to the details.
Thank you. I'll ask back the pointer. No, thanks very much, because we needed to give it to Stefano. Stefano, before heading into the report, a quick question. Giulio was talking about explaining the difference between the direct and the indirect pressures. Is it safe to say that many times the indirect pressures are really the ones that hurt even more than the direct pressures?
Yeah, it's correct, and this is what we try to do with this research project. As you said, we started a few years ago. I think it's really to drive the attention to the indirect type of pressure. It's also said at the opening that about 80 or even more in terms of percentage of impact is coming from inland-based activities. So we need to, I would say, make companies more aware of their relation in order to try to take them on board and with the support of companies' innovation processes, try to change the type of impact. So,
thanks. I think awareness is really the big word, right? So let's dive into the report, and Stefano, if you can tell us a bit the findings, the key findings.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks everyone. Also on my side, being from Bocconi and Bocconi University, it's a pleasure to have you here hosted in this wonderful Aula Magna. Before starting, I think that a big component of the entire journey of the One Ocean Foundation is to try to anchor to solid research, let's say, the process of transformation we want to have and make. I have a double hat here, so I'm a professor at Bocconi. At Bocconi, started many years ago to work on sustainability, but I'm also I would say, enthusiast of this journey, being part of the foundation. And with this double hat, I've been trying to collaborate over these years. And what I'm starting with is to try to position our research in the context of what we call the blue natural capital. This is a slide that tries to represent what is the blue natural capital. You might be familiar with the notion of natural capital at large. So just to give you a couple of information, if we consider the bees, this little insect, they are usually providing a work for everybody. They do pollination, and with the work of the bees, we contribute to many different industries in the value generation, from coffee to agriculture. Then other type of services generated by natural capital, for example, are related to the trees or the fish, if I look at the blue natural capital, that are generated, they are for free, and they offer to humans, and humans are building on that, their prosperity in the very end. So being a little bit more precise, we define the blue natural capital as a part of natural capital, and we look at both coastal and marine ecosystem, and we consider, for example, marine animals and plants, or the mangrove forest, or the coral reef. And this is an asset, a precious asset. As it was said by our dean, it's extremely important to preserve this asset, because this asset is generating what we call the ecosystem services that were already mentioned, but this is the flows of services that are generated by the natural capital, and more specifically by the blue natural capital. For example, if I consider fisheries, I mean, this is about leveraging of what the sea and the ocean is generating. But also we can consider the capacity to store CO2 as another of the services that the blue natural capitals offer. So it's like the distinction between an asset and then the flows or resources, the revenues that are generated. And these services are at the basis of our, let's say, wealth, our well-being, our generation of revenues in many different sectors. Some sectors are directly leveraging on these services. If I consider fisheries, aquaculture, and maritime transportation leverage on the ocean in order to generate value, but we have a number of services that are not fully captured by our system. If you consider the ocean sink, the capacity to absorb CO2, what is the correct value? How can you measure that? On our report, we have the case and the example of the whales that are part of a wonderful, I would say, cycle that nature is offering, and they are contributing to our prosperity. So put numbers and monetize is not easy, but the number, for example, of the overall services can be sized in 5.2 trillion US dollar, which is the size of economy like Germany or Japan, so a G7 economy. And the asset, of course, is much bigger. We are talking about 24, 25 trillion, and this is probably a very conservative estimation because it's not easy to understand all the interconnectedness about these elements. Then the other part that I want to stress, and we stress in the report, is nature-based solutions. So we need to preserve the asset, we need to preserve the services, therefore we need to conserve and restore nature. And in the last report by the IPCC, a focus was on the nature-based solution that can be extended and stretched to the ocean. For example, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, a way to, let's say, for example, introducing quota or modern techniques of fishing in order to preserve the fish and the entire value of the ocean in that sense. Ocean conservation and restoration, another bunch of actions that we can do in order to preserve the ocean. And finally, what we call marine protected areas that are only 8%. More precisely, we go down to 3% if we consider what we call high and full protected areas. But we need to incorporate finance, for example, and new financial models in order to have bonds related to this part of nature and to protect that. We started our report with this analysis in order to frame the research and provide the correct boundaries. More precisely, it was underlined by Jan Pachner, the importance of awareness, and also Giulio mentioned awareness a couple of times in his presentation. So we started this report, this new report, trying to better understand how companies are addressing the issue of the ocean protection and how much they are aware of the ocean protection. So we've been using two dimensions to assess in terms of what we call operationalizing in terms of research the variable, to assess how they are aware. On the one hand, we measure the level of adoption of the SDGs 14, life below water. On the other hand, we've been focusing on acknowledging the pressure exerted on the good environmental status that was mentioned by Giulio, which is a measure of the pressure on the ocean. First picture I provide is the adoption of the SDGs 14, and as it was already highlighted, unfortunately, SDGs 14 is not the number one in terms of attention by companies. So companies, although we are in a position where there is an increase of relevance of the SDGs 14, which is life below water, that has been in terms of trajectory and upward trajectories, as you can see in the slide. Anyway, the SDGs 14 is still one of the least addressed by and prioritized by companies among the 17 SDGs of the Agenda 2030. You can see from the slides that the number one and number two are the SDGs related to climate action and gender equality. This is in the perspective of business, while the SDGs on the ocean still is somehow residual, even compared to the other SDGs related to the E, the environmental part. Some sectors, like the blue economy or the ocean economy sectors, so maritime transportation, aquaculture and fisheries, or the activities related to the utilization for energy generation of the ocean, are more aware. We can see that 32% of companies in these domains are, let's say, prioritizing the SDGs 14, but overall, we're still on the way to generate more attention because this is not the number one point in companies' approach to sustainability. The second dimension we've been analyzing is a little bit more complicated, so I try to be as clear as I can. This is a graph where we start saying that 52% in percentage of the companies in our sample, so the 2,400 companies we analyzed, are aware at least of one pressure on the ocean. How do we measure the pressure, and what is this idea of measuring the pressure? So you see from the graph that we have the three environmental domains that were already explained. One is related to what we call I try to be more simple, the biological dimension, for example, biodiversity. The second column is related to the chemical part, so marine litter, chemical into the ocean, into fish and shellfish, or eutrophication. The last column is related to what we call the physical impact and pressure. For example, energy in the ocean, or for example, seabed mining, or for example, acidification or rise of temperature. The dot that you see, or the circles, are related to two elements. On the one hand, you have, when it is red, the fact that the scientists are telling us this is a severe, important area we need to take care. And the size, instead, is referring to the fact that companies are aware, so they are mentioning somehow the fact that this is an important element in their sustainability strategy. As you see, the central column, with regard to the chemical part, show us that there is higher level of awareness by the different industries. On the right part of the graph, of the slide, instead you see that on the physical there is a lack of attention comparing to the other two types of environmental domain. In a nutshell, I can add that the so-called ocean economy, let's say, sectors and industries, they are more aware. They are the upper part of the graph, and you see that the size of the dot is bigger, so they are operating directly and indirectly, they have an impact, while other sectors, they probably require a kind of push from our side in order to increase the awareness.
Thank you very much.
To conclude, the 2 points are, we are on the way to consolidate the awareness, but a lot needs to be done, and that's why we are here to try to, let's say, push attention on the topic.
Thank you, Stefano. I'd like to move it on to Federico, because clearly talking about almost 2,500 companies and all the reportings and balance sheets, we're talking about a huge amount of data. And I think we had a some innovative approaches also on the analysis. So maybe you can explain a bit better on what has been done on that.
Yes, happy to. So basically, after we analyzed, Stefano described the awareness of companies, we then had a second step that we wanted to follow, which is try to see what are the companies doing. And so what are the actions that they are putting in place to mitigate the impact on the ocean or to find opportunities, as we will discuss in a second. And so we had to do that 2 challenges. So the first one is what Jan was saying now, which is we wanted to to cover as many companies as possible. So we had the ambition to cover as much as possible of the total market cap, and we wanted to analyze 2,500 companies, looking at their financial reports and sustainability reports. The second challenge that we had was we didn't have a prior hypothesis on what these actions were. And so you cannot just check for what are the words that are contained in the reports, but we wanted to be open to understand what are companies doing. Mm-hmm. And so the technology that we used in the past, and that Giulio described before, natural language processing, doesn't allow for that. You have to go with a prior hypothesis and check are companies covering these aspects or not. So in order to overcome these two challenges, the volume of companies and data that we wanted to elaborate, and the fact that we wanted to augment, as it is usually said, the set of information that we wanted to check, we leveraged on generative AI. And so through a partnership with OpenAI, that is a company you're probably aware of, ChatGPT, that is one of their main products. So we leveraged a collaboration with them in order to analyze a large number of these corporate reports. And so just to give you an idea, you see here data is allowed to elaborate more than 300,000 pages of information. And with a time of elaborating the information that is incredibly lower than it used to be in the past in the previous two editions, what we had done. So how did we use that? So what we wanted to check is, as I said, what are the actions that companies are putting in place? And so we leveraged on the ODI, so we will describe later on the Ocean Disclosure Initiative more in detail, but through the ODI there is a scientific approach on classifying what are the actions that companies can put in place. And so we have identified in particular 11 actions that we wanted to check if companies were putting in place or not. And based on that, we calculated an activation score that goes from 0 to 100. 100 means companies put in place all the actions that a sector like them can put in place, while 0 means they have not done any of these actions. And so we then measured what is the average activations of companies. We see that through these 6 sectors that we focused on, the average activation score is 22%. So the average is not particularly promising if we see the overall number. However, I will comment on that later on. I think the promising part is we see that there is a large variation. And so there are companies that arrive to level of activations that are above 70, 80, and even 90%. So while the overall average is low, we see that there are companies that are pioneering in this area. And so we went one step ahead, and we started to say, but is there a journey to arrive to this level of maturity? And so we classified the level of maturity on a scale 1 to 4, and then we looked what are the actions that companies are putting in place and whether there is an evolution in terms of what they are doing to preserve and reduce the impacts on the oceans. And what we found out is interesting, because what we see is companies that are early on in their journey towards preservation start with actions that are, in most of the cases, indirectly related to the ocean. That means that they have introduced product innovation, process innovation, or supply chain interventions that indirectly have a positive impact on the ocean. And then with the higher maturity, companies start to also have direct actions to mitigate the impact on the ocean. They start to measure then what is their impact and what are the actions that they can put in place, and they start to get organized. Getting organized means they put governance in place, they put policies in place, and so that shows that with an increasing level of maturity, the set of actions becomes complete also when we measure it according to the ODI dimensions. Okay. We wanted then to see what is the reason, so what is the purpose of launching these actions. And the broad spectrum that we wanted to check is, on the one end, the reactive behavior of saying, I put in place a certain action to mitigate the risks, or if you want to have a reactive approach. On the opposite spectrum, you can have companies that see an opportunity in preserving the ocean and find also an economic benefit out of it. And so we started to analyze companies that are doing some of the direct actions on the ocean, and we see that half of them have still a reactive approach, so mostly to mitigate the risks of having impacts on the ocean. but 50% either have both a spin of risk and opportunity, or see their actions as pointing towards the opportunity side. And also in this case, we tried to see if there was a journey towards a increased ability to capture opportunities. And so we see that the evidences are incredibly, in this slide, when I first saw it, I thought it was fake, because the evidence was so perfect that I couldn't believe in it. Yeah. But the reality is, you see that the higher the maturity of the companies, the more they realize that the ocean is not only something to preserve, but actually by preserving them, you can have actually a business benefit out of it. And so this opens then to a positive, possibly a positive spin of our research. So we have seen, and we have heard many of the speakers before, pointing in the direction of how serious the situation is, and we are aware that this is the case. However, if we want some hope that comes out of this research, what we can see is that companies that are pioneer start to see also the upsides of being pioneers and actually getting a positive return out of their actions. And so what we then see as a possible way of starting a positive cycle is something that starts from the awareness and then moves in the direction of activation that I just discussed, and through that finding also opportunities of business. And so we believe that through this virtuous cycle, there can be a positive will that is self-sustained. So it's not only a cost to the companies, but starts to also pay back and be actually a positive and hopefully optimistic perspective going forward.
And becomes a business opportunity.
Indeed.
Okay, so I'm glad to leave this with a positive message. I think also what comes to my mind, thank you, Federico, is since for many companies they're really product oriented, right? So I think what we will see in the future, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think companies more and more might engage with NGOs or with specialists also from scientific perspective to help them drive and implement these changes if they're serious, because that avoids them to go the wrong direction.
Indeed, yes.
Okay. So since we have this positive message, what would you say are the main blue business opportunities out there for the companies, Stefano, that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, this is another important point we try to focus in the report. We identified, let's say, on the one hand, what we call nature-based solutions that are already quickly described, that are options for companies in order to, let's say, take advantage of conservation and protection of the ocean. That could be more, on the one hand, related to, I would say, industrial activities, but also financial one. And then we have a number of other clusters that we've been analyzing. I try to be brief on that, but we go from opportunities related to new material, for example, that are going to substitute contaminants or in the very end plastics that's risk to end up in the ocean with a high probability or likelihood today, up to the utilization, for example, of the energy that is inside the ocean for the purpose of having clean solution for our well-being, up to all the solutions related to the mapping and monitoring of the ocean that today generate big data that are at the basis of the conservation, but also of the activation of virtuous behavior at the level of companies. Additionally, we have identified a set of enablers. Without entering in the detail, we need to have finance on board, and enablers are related to the flow of investment that need to be, I would say, strengthened, but are at the heart of the transformation. And these range from new, I would say, accelerator or incubator that push the new startup companies in this area, which is a very interesting and new phenomenon. And on the other side, you might have the traditional private investment up to what it is today, the blue bond area. So there are multiple initiatives on the way that are, again, promising in order to activate this virtuous cycle, because we need somehow the fuel in order to make the cycle working. A final comment that I just would like to share, with open also to the following part of the discussion, is that I think that urgency is an important element that we saw since the opening of this event. And we lost many years when we look at climate change without activating these virtuous cycles, because I would say that finally we have not been inviting on the scene for many years the business community and the financial communities. So it was more a focus on policy makers that are essential. You underline the importance of policymaker with the new treaties and the new convention, but we need to activate these virtuous cycles as soon as possible. And that's one of the purpose of the foundation and of this project with McKinsey, Bocconi, and CDP also.
Thank you, Stefano. It gives me the link straight to Federico to say, what would be the key message that you would like to give out to industry leaders that are either here with us or listening to us right now? What's the key message?
Yes. So on the key message, I will stay on the optimistic tone.
Absolutely.
And so I will say that it's the positive momentum that we are seeing, and the positive momentum in two dimensions. On a macro dimension is seeing that there are many different movements of stakeholders that are moving in the direction of making sustainability of the ocean a priority. So that happens for the policymakers. It is true for the citizens and for the clients, if we see it, the citizen with a corporate perspective. And lastly, which is the focus of what we do in our research, companies that are starting to see the upsides of protecting the ocean. And so then looking at the micro dimension, what we observed through the 3 different editions of the report is that there is a positive momentum also when we see the progress of the different metrics for the corporates. So probably it is not as fast as we would like to see the progress to happen, right. But every single metric that we measured wasn't improving over time. And so while the speed can be accelerated, the fact that the awareness is increasing, the fact that the level of activation is increasing is, again, a promising message. And I would like to close with one additional remark, that the more we study this phenomenon of how to crack the advantage for companies to launch this positive spin appears key, is the first step of this wheel. And so really working on the awareness. And one part that we included in the report and we didn't comment so far is we also studied how much companies are using external rating or external frameworks to assess their level of impact on the environment. And while when we look at the broader sustainability spectrum, there is a good use of external rating and external frameworks, with 93% of the companies actually using one or another sustainability metric in their reports. When we then move to the ocean, the percentage is less than 1% that uses a metric that is able to measure the impact on the ocean. And so this is one aspect that is particularly relevant if we want to activate this virtuous cycle. It has to start from being able to measure what the current impact is. And that's where I know that the One Ocean Foundation has started working on that since some years, and I think it's more and more evident that this is, in our view, the right direction to take.
Thanks very much. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Federico. It gives me, you did already the introduction for the next, for the next topic, which is basically the Ocean Disclosure Initiative, which is a project that started, as Giulio anticipated, already like 3 years ago. And we've been working on this quite excessively, and we know the reason why. So it has been confirmed that we went the right direction, which is comfortable to know. And since we have a specialist sitting with us, with Stefano, although you're young, but I think you got involved in climate change, now this is already 20 years ago or more. Maybe you can explain a bit more on the Ocean Disclosure Initiative, on how it's structured and how we try to project.
Thanks a lot, Jan, and thanks, Federico, because you opened the door to the topic. So I think it's exactly what you mentioned, that the level of attention to specific framework and standard on the ocean is still very limited, also because we don't have a lot of standards on that. And my personal story started many years ago, working with the data of CDP since the very beginning, and also with some publication on that data in 2006, 2008. So I'm among the pioneer, probably using this information. And we immediately started thinking that we had to do more or less the same path in order to bring company and bring finance on board. So in this slide you see that the goal we have is to incorporate companies and their stakeholder into, let's say, process of decision that are more thorough, more informed, in order to address the challenge, to start activating the right behavior that need also to match what the scientists and the experts are telling us as key element where to focus. How to do that? Creating awareness among companies on marine ecosystem direct and indirect pressure, enabling a transparent and disclosure system, and that's what ODI, Ocean Disclosure Initiative, is about. Fostering the response, and additionally helping also the financial community to interpret what it is a business risk related to the ocean. We know that ESG is very much focused also on the risk part in order to avoid to have in the portfolio of investment what we call stranded asset that might not have a value in the future. And finally, we want to help investment, private-public investment, to go in the right direction. So this is the overall, let's say, framework we have been designing. And with that in mind, we have worked on two components with the ODI, Ocean Disclosure Initiative. On the one hand, to organize a framework business-oriented, so we want to talk the language of business and the financial community. We want to be impactful with our framework, to try to embark as much companies and financial institutions as we can in order to really have a wave of transformation. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that we need to be sector-specific. I think that in the process of development of metrics, of KPIs, of framework, we realize that the complexity of the interaction with between business and the environmental and social dimension require sector-specific activity. I think that the CDP and many other initiatives move from being broad to being much more specific and tailored. If we analyze the set of information we collected, this quite complex graph with a lot of color, the mosaic structure, showed you that you have very big difference from sector to sector. So we need to be driven by specific sector type of initiative and framework. On the other side, we want to engage the scientific community. We want to bridge the language, the jargon of science with the jargon of business and finance. And if I can, I want to be a little bit provocative on that. There are two communities that have not been trying to bridge so much the gap for many years, and this has been one of the reasons why we have been losing a lot of time with climate change. The fact that finance suddenly wake up few years ago and they decided, I can use the expression, to reinvent the wheel, when there were already CDP and other number of standards where on my side I'm doing research. I thought there was maybe the evidence of the fact that we could have done the things in a different way from the very beginning. So that's exactly what we try to do, also for the reason we are here sitting all together. And we want to have a robust system of evaluation that highlight what is really material from the expert and science perspective, and science-based, that word that we're using today quite a lot with regard to climate, when we try to link the Paris Agreement with 1.5, 2 degrees, the concentration of ppm in the atmosphere with the amount of emission and the combustion of fossil fuel. Same logic with regard to the ocean, where the difference is that we don't have just one single equation that link fossil fuel gigatons concentration to variation of temperature, because we have several what we call I mean, the ocean domain, and we
Yes.
cluster that in 3 dimensions, but it's a little bit more complicated. With that in mind, we define the Ocean Disclosure Initiative Framework, which is organized with the attempt to respond to managers and to experts in finance with the language of science. We identified 4 managerial dimensions. By the way, the same dimension has been at the basis of the analysis that Federico discussed in order to go through the hundreds of thousands of pages of reports and documents. We start with the what we call the picture of the company, the boundaries of the company, and then we enter into 4 dimensions, ranging from governance and policies. So let's check if companies have specific policies on the ocean, if there is a system to relate the board and the attention of the board to the ocean dimension, entering later on into what we call the risk disclosure part. Do we perform a risk assessment on the ocean, although you might have indirect pressure? Entering at 3rd level into the KPI, the measurement part, which is a little bit complicated, but we're working on that sector by sector. And finally, analyzing what are the responses. And as it was said, it could be product innovation, process innovation, supply chain innovation, partnership, or so on and so forth. So we identify a number of categories. How we manage that, I mean, there are the 3 environmental domain that are already been, and we have already been describing that a number of times, but we want to collect what we call primary and secondary sources of information. So with a questionnaire, leveraging all the information of a company and elaborating that and matching this information with information we can find on the web. Today, big data are available. We have much more information sources on the web, ranging from ESG rating agencies up to NGO report and other type of policy paper we have. So that's more or less, in a nutshell, the purpose of the initiative. And on that initiative, I think that we are building a lot of our effort as a foundation.
Thank you very much, Stefano. I think also the work that has been done on that, the innovation part, working with artificial intelligence is probably going to be a leap forward also in the research on the ODI for secondary information. So I'm sure this is a very good experience that we went through. Giulio, a lot has been achieved so far. Where do we go from here? What's the plan with the ODI?
Yeah, over the last month we have worked a lot on each industry. Since we have said that each industry generates a different kind of pressures, direct but also indirect pressures on the oceans. So we decided to go into the details, industry by industry, starting from those that we thought are more relevant in terms of direct and indirect pressures. So we did a review on, for instance, fashion industry, oil and gas, construction, and these 6 industries we see. But at the same time, we work a lot in building up a questionnaire that is customized for each industry. And we asked to big players, big corporations, and to our partners to help us in defining and to try this questionnaire and this tool, understanding if it can work for each specific industry, for each company. So over the last month, we have worked on these 6 industries, and hopefully in the next year, we want to complete all the 16 industries we have described before, being ready to have a complete set of questionnaires, of reviews, and to be ready to launch, hopefully by the end of the next year, this ODI tool. But so I would take the chance to ask all the companies if they want to support us in this process. They are more than welcome. We need your help to make it happen.
Thank you very much, Giulio. So the validation, clearly, the validation process of this tool is hugely important because it has to be a tool that works for the industry, as we mentioned many times, so for the companies, but also for the financial industry. And we also had a financial partner that was part of the program and of the project in order not to create a tool that is somewhere out there and doesn't get used. So I think, as Stefano said at the beginning, already when we started 3 years ago, I remember that you called out on your experience and said, no, we have to use CDP as a road model. We have to use CDP as a road model. So you can well imagine how excited we are to have Sue with us. It took us quite some years to get to this stage. So Sue, welcome to be with us. And maybe you tell us about CDP, and then we'll get a little bit into more details and other things.
Thank you very much, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me here. I'm really delighted to be here. Oceans has been a personal love of mine. I met my husband scuba diving. There's an argument that I can't talk underwater, and that might have been a factor. But either way, so I've been longing for the chance to get closer to the work that you're doing, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you. It's been said that CDP is the most powerful NGO you've never heard of. So I wanted to just unpack for a very small amount of time what the machinery is that lies behind the generation of the environmental disclosure data that we can provide. So CDP is an NGO. We are the global independent platform for environmental disclosure. We started about 20 years ago with climate disclosure, so corporates could disclose their climate footprint to us, and that has grown to cover some other areas as well, which I'll come on to. We're firmly based at the interface between the environment and the economy. Our vision is for a thriving economy that works for people and the planet in the long term. And we focus on investors, companies, and cities so that they can have the information that they need to weigh up their risks, opportunities, dependencies, and impacts on the environment and take the urgent action that we need to see. So just looking now at, ooh, these are moving without me, how exciting. This is the machinery, and I'm sorry, this is very dry, but it won't take long. So we work with our investor signatories and the heads of supply chains, and they are the authorities that request companies to disclose their environmental data to us. They make the request, we handle the request for them, but they are the signatories and it's their authority that drives corporates to respond. So the disclosers then respond with their environmental data to us, and you can see those little pictures there on the screen. We have currently themes around climate, freshwater, and deforestation, and corporates, depending on their sector and their priorities, can disclose into all three or one of those. We collect all that data, and then we have a very big data set of environmental disclosure data, and we provide the data back to the disclosures themselves, so they then can have the insight and the benchmarking that they need to realize their opportunities and manage their risks for the environment. And we also provide the data back to the authorities, who then can take action depending on their objectives for their portfolios, the risks and investment opportunities that they want to manage, and the purchasing decisions that they want to make. And of course, we also provide that data in the form of insights and data products to other data users for further analysis and for civil society to use. So that's under the bonnet. In terms of the numbers, this is the scale that we've now reached in 20 years. So we have more than 700 financial institutions worth controlling $130 trillion, and we have almost 300 major supply chain members with a huge degree of purchasing power, over $6 trillion. Last year, almost 9,000 companies responded with their environmental disclosure data through CDP, and we also have over 1,000 cities, and that includes actually states and regions, also disclosing their environmental footprint. So we're reaching a certain scale, and that altogether covers environmental disclosure from 50%, more than 50% of market capitalization. We do want the other 50% though. We are distributed around the world. We're a global NGO. We are headquartered in London, but we have offices around the world, and we are encouraging disclosure around the world. And actually, currently, we're seeing the fastest disclosure growth in Asia, as we see that economy engaging more and more with the environmental dimension of the challenges that they face as they develop. Just in terms of funding, so as I said, we are an NGO. More than half of our income is from philanthropic grants, and then we have an array of service-based and sales-based income as well that supports us. The reason why we've pursued this path is that we know it makes a difference. We know it works. by providing the data that we collect back to the actors that need it, we can drive that wonderful loop that the previous panelists have already referred to of disclosure, insight, and then action. So the transparency is everything. It all begins with disclosure, with being able to monitor and understand our impact so that we can then decide what we want to do about them. And we have got some very good stories of how this really works in the real world. Some of them, I think the first two are on very high-level decision-making, enabled by the transparency that we offer. So the Security and Exchange Commission rule in the United States relating to climate is enabled by the fact that CDP's data showed that it was fairly normal for leading businesses to be disclosing, and that gave strength to the decision-making around the SEC rule on climate. CDP was cited throughout that document. We've recently really celebrated the decision from a Spanish bank, BBVA, to link the terms of a loan to performance in CDP's water questionnaire, which is another really great example of financial institutions making decisions based around data that shows them how risky investments are or are not, depending on a company performance. We've got this working again at the supply chain level. This is an area that's growing very fast and we need to keep developing it. But we can quantify the amount of emissions reductions that have been achieved through the supply chain initiative that we run, removing carbon from the atmosphere as a result of purchasing decisions. And we've also seen it in a place-based sense as well. So one example here is in India, Chennai used their disclosure data in our fresh water questionnaire to identify the option of investing in adaptation measures for fresh water, a new stormwater management system to reduce their risk, and that was made visible as an opportunity that would benefit the city through the action of disclosure. The final area that, of course, we're all very aware of is the use of data in holding actors to account. This is a slightly uncomfortable area, but you can say that we love greenwashing because it means something is important enough to want to lie about. And if the environment is getting into that space, then that's a good thing. If transparency can help hold people to account so that they cannot claim what they're not doing, then that simply strengthens the stage on which we're all trying to work. So there's many other stories here, but I think it's encouraging to note that all the slightly dry work of compiling data and disclosing it can lead really to impact in the real world. So you'll remember when I started, I was talking about the three little icons: climate, freshwater, and forest. And there's no wave there, there's no shark. And we want to put one there. CDP has not yet got a disclosure channel for ocean health, and it's something that we really need to correct. So we're starting now, which is why I'm so excited to be here. I put this slide up in tribute to the giants on whose shoulders we stand. We're not having to start from the beginning in the way that we did for climate. There's a lot to build on already. We have experts in the room who have already done a huge amount of research, and the understanding is far, far advanced. So it feels that the global platform for disclosure can embrace a lot of the expertise and experience that's already here so that we can accelerate the provision of a disclosure channel for ocean. CDP has started with plastic. We're horrified by the information that's coming to us, partly from our disclosures, partly from science, that we're heading for a world in which there's more weight of plastic in the ocean than there is fish. And we are starting to do some work in that space as our initial attempt, but we will go beyond that. This year we're piloting some exploratory questions for plastic. They're going to 7,000 companies. We'll have some understanding at the end of this year about upstream polymer production and use of plastics, and we'll be able to build that out as we go forward. That's where we begin, but it's certainly not where we end. We are thinking much more ambitiously than just the waste stream into the ocean, and really thinking about some of the things that previous speakers have already spoken about around how we can get the disclosure machinery that we run to really support the Sustainable Development Goal for life beneath the water, so that we can encourage and enable companies and financial institutions and sustainable places to disclose ocean data that allows them to take the action and allows financial flows to be redirected so that the blue economy starts to work in a much more positive sense. And the final point there that I also want to come on to a little bit later is that we hope that in doing so, we can create a mandate for much more assertive and ambitious government action to follow, which is what we've seen in other spaces. I've already mentioned this, but I just want to identify some of the partnerships that we believe will really help in this endeavour, and this is very much a collective endeavour. So delighted to be here, and we've had a lot of very productive conversations with our conveners, One Ocean Foundation, and others, and we are working closely with other leaders in the space, some of whom have helped us by providing funding for initial work, and others who are contributing by strengthening the external frameworks and targets that we will be relying on going forward.
Okay.
I just wanted to go back to this point about regulation, better policy and regulation. So we are mainly focused in that sustainable economy space, and we've seen that the private sector can respond much more quickly than governments can when they have the right information. CDP exists to provide that information, but in doing so, we can demonstrate the possibilities and we can encourage governments. And we really do need that governmental action to follow so that we are able to address the barriers that the private sector is constrained by. So while encouraging leadership within the private sector with the provision of good information, we can also identify the barriers beyond which they cannot go. And that's where we will need governments to follow. And in doing this, we will create a mandate and we will make it much more easy and powerful to see good ocean-related policy following the efforts if we are able to put this in place. In terms of how to do this, we will expand stepwise. We're already starting with high levels of disclosure, many of whom are already relevant to Ocean. 45 of the Ocean 100 companies are already disclosing to CDP. So we're building on this. We're starting to develop this year with our pilot questions on plastics, the conversations that we're having with friends and advisors. By next year, we'll be able to do some consultation with the market. The first time we might be able to go out with a suite of ocean questions will be in 2025. So we look forward to continuing the conversation with you as we go through this process.
Thanks very much, Sue. Okay, we really look forward. And I think there's no better partner for us to really try to we always looked up to CDP throughout all the years when we worked on this. So clear we don't want to walk this way on ourselves, and we really look forward to a collaboration, and wherever we can add value with what has been done so far on the studies, I think it can only accelerate on where we want to go. And so thanks very much. Looking forward to collaborate with CDP on this. Maybe if we can ask you on what's from your experience over the past 20 years, where do you see there are lessons learned where we can avoid wasting time, since we really don't have time left?
Yes, we really don't have time left, but the good news is it's taken us 20 years to get to this point for climate. Right. But each subsequent area that we've addressed, we've been able to accelerate. Faster. And we can certainly do that with ocean. We already have, so for example, plastic. Of the 20 top banks that are investing in single-use plastic, 14 of them are signatories to CDP, 18 disclose to CDP. So we can, by highlighting, starting from this year with plastics disclosure, it'll become much more visible as an issue, and we'll be able to speed things along much more quickly from the base that we already have. We are in a much better position with the provision of external standards and frameworks. The Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure is already up and running. What we saw for climate was as soon as CDP aligned with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure in 2018, we saw our disclosure numbers shoot through the roof because of that external framework relevance. We're going to see the same again. We're exploring alignment. TNFD is still developing, but they're going to have an ocean component. If we can explore the maximum degree of alignment there, that will help corporates and financial institutions attach their data to these wider frameworks and these wider expectations. I think we'll see a much faster acceleration, and we're going to need to see it as well.
Great. What are your ideas on how we can actually contribute, going on from here?
Well, give me your hand, Jan, so I can bite it off.
Okay.
We really hope to have to continue this relationship that we're developing now. We want to take your strategic advice. We're hoping to create a group of partners who can really help shape CDP's ocean disclosure, and we're really looking to you for that help and that partnership as we go forward.
Thanks very much. I think we're only honored to provide that. Thank you very much. if you want to get a message across to who is listening, what would be that message that you'd really sort of get across the room?
I would say we're used now to a world where climate disclosure is mainstream, but nature disclosure will be mainstream too. Ocean will be an enormous component of that. So get ready. Transparency makes the economy work more efficiently, and we're currently lacking transparency in the ocean space, and therefore we're under-realizing the opportunities, and we're excessively exposed to the risks of a weak blue economy. So mainstream ocean disclosure, be ready for it, be ready to disclose, be ready to provide the data, be ready to respond to financial institutions and purchasers' requests. It's coming. Work with us to help shape the way the disclosure works. We will end up with a tool that will benefit anybody, but don't think that you can wait. It's going to come, so get ready.
And it's also a benefit actually on who is active right now, because it's going to come. So if you're active now, basically you have a time advantage on what's coming.
There's definitely a first mover advantage, and we've already got, so for example, of the disclosures that we already have in the double figures of disclosures saying that they have major revenue streams centered around aquaculture, fisheries, seafood processing. There's already people in the system. They're the ones who are going to help us shape the system. They're the ones whose data is already available to reassure investors and reassure purchasers that they have taken seriously the challenges around the ocean. So the more quickly that people can join and understand and be more familiar with it, even if it's just at a low level. We do say leadership starts simply with measurements. You don't have to be the person who's solved all the problems, but the person who's unable to even identify the data that tells you what the story is going to be in a very weak position going forward.
There's the old saying, you can't measure, you can't manage. So.
Can't measure, you can't manage.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.